If you leave her there, she's dead by morning. That thought hit Marcus Webb like a fist to the chest, and he was 12 years old, homeless, and so cold his fingers had stopped feeling like his own. The woman wasn't moving, the snow was still falling, and every survival instinct in his skinny, starving body was screaming at him to run. He didn't run. If this story hits something deep in you, subscribe to this channel, drop the name of your city in the comments, and stay with me until the very end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The last thing Marcus Webb ate that day was half a granola bar he'd found wedged between the slats of a park bench on the south end of Iron Ridge, Wisconsin. He'd split it in 2 equal pieces the way his father taught him. One half now, one half later, and he'd been clutching the second piece in his coat pocket for 6 hours, was waiting for the moment when the hunger got so loud he couldn't ignore it anymore. That moment never came, because something else found him first. He heard her before he saw her. Not a cry, mama, not a scream, just a sound, a low, wet exhale, barely louder than the wind coming from the narrow space between the old hardware store and the laundromat on Kessler Street. A sound that didn't belong to the night. A sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand straight up despite the cold. Marcus stopped walking. He pulled his coat tighter, a man's coat 3 sizes too big. The zipper busted at the top, held together at the chest with a bent safety pin he'd found on a bus seat 2 weeks ago. He told himself to keep moving. He told himself it was probably just a boo, or the wind playing tricks, or a drunk sleeping it off. He told himself a lot of things. Then he heard it again. And this time he was certain. That was a person. He didn't make a decision so much as his feet made it for him. They turned left into the shadow of the alley, and his eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. The temperature that night was 15 below zero. The official kind, not wind chill, not feels like, but actual documented dangerous 15 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that didn't announce itself. It just came in quietly and started shutting things down. She was lying face up in the snow at the back of the alley about 20 feet from the street. Marcus froze. She was a woman probably in her 40s, wearing a leather jacket over a flannel shirt, not nearly enough for this night. One of her boots had come half off her foot. Her dark hair was spread around her head in the snow, and there was a gash along the side of her temple, dried blood already crusted in the cold. Her chest was rising. Barely, but it was rising. "Hey," Marcus said. His voice came out strange, thin and high, the voice of a boy who hadn't spoken to another person in almost 3 days. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. He stepped closer. His boots crunched in the snow. He knelt down beside her and put 2 fingers against her neck, the way his father had shown him once, during one of those long Saturday afternoons when his dad used to turn the television off and say, "Let me teach you something real today, Mark." He felt a pulse. Slow, too slow. "Okay," Marcus whispered mostly to himself. "Okay." He stood up and looked back toward Kessler Street. Not a single person. Not a single car. Iron Ridge after 10 o'clock on a Wednesday in January was about as close to a ghost town as a place could get without technically being abandoned. The nearest hospital was 11 miles away. Marcus didn't have a phone. He'd sold his prepaid for bus fare 3 months ago, back when he still thought he might actually get somewhere. He looked down at the woman again, thought about his options, thought about how thin those options were. He could go knock on doors, but which ones at this hour? A homeless black kid in a man's coat pounding on strangers' doors in the dead of winter? He knew exactly how that would go. He'd seen exactly how that went. He could go find a payphone. The nearest one he knew about was 6 blocks away on Commerce, outside the old diner that was open until midnight. 6 blocks there, 6 blocks back, time to explain, time to wait. 20 minutes at minimum. Probably more. In 15 below zero temperatures, an unconscious person in wet clothes in the snow did not have 20 minutes. He knew that the way he knew a lot of things he wished he didn't know from experience. From watching the world in that invisible, comprehensive way that homeless kids develop because nobody is watching out for them, so they learn to watch out for themselves. He'd spent 8 months learning to read situations, to calculate risk, to make fast decisions with bad information and no margin for error. He made one now. "All right," he said, his breath coming out in white clouds. "All right, I've got you." He grabbed the woman under her arms and started to pull. She was heavier than he expected, a lot heavier. Marcus was 5'1" and weighed maybe 95 pounds, soaking wet, which he frequently was. The woman was easily 140. And dead weight, the specific, helpless, terrifying dead weight of an unconscious person, is the heaviest thing in the world. He pulled anyway. He got her out of this open center of the alley and into the corner where the two brick walls met, where the wind couldn't find them as easily. His arms were shaking, not just from cold, from effort, from something he didn't have a word for yet. He stripped off the outer layer. He was wearing a thick flannel shirt he'd been given at the shelter 3 weeks ago, the last time they had had room for him, and he wrapped it around her legs, tucking it under her as best he could. Then he did the one other thing he could think to do. He lay down beside her, pressed his back against the wall, and pulled her as close to him as he could get, trying to share whatever heat his small body still had to offer. The cold of the ground came up through him immediately, through his coat, through his jeans, through his skin, into his bones. He gritted his teeth. He focused on her breathing, watched her chest, counted the seconds between breaths. "You're going to be okay," he said. He didn't know if it was true. He said it anyway. "You're going to be okay. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." His father used to say that presence was the most powerful thing one person could give another. You don't always have to fix it, Mark. Sometimes you just have to stay. So Marcus stayed. He didn't know how much time passed. Time does strange things in extreme cold. It stretches and compresses simultaneously so that each minute feels both endless and frighteningly short. He drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep, more like a suspended state where his brain kept running calculations, her breathing steady or not, pulse when he could reach her neck, the temperature dropping or holding signs of movement, signs of nothing, while his body tried to conserve what little heat remained. He thought about his father. James Webb had been a lot of things, a mechanic first and always, a volunteer at the food bank on alternating Sundays, a man who laughed too loud at his own jokes and made the best scrambled eggs in the state of Wisconsin, and never, not once in his life, walked past someone in trouble without stopping. That last quality had defined him. And ultimately, in the complicated, unfair way life delivers its hardest lessons, it had contributed to his death, not through any fault of his own, but through the simple, devastating mathematics of being in the wrong place at the right time. A car accident on Highway 14 2 years ago. James Webb had pulled over to help a stranded driver in the rain, and a truck had come around the curve too fast. Marcus had been 10 years old. His mother had been gone since he was 6. There were no grandparents, no aunts or uncles who could take him. There was a foster placement that lasted 4 months, and a group home after that, and then a series of events that Marcus didn't like to revisit because they made him feel things that were too large and too heavy to carry in the daytime. And then there was just Iron Ridge in January, and a park bench and a half a granola bar. And now this. He pressed his hand flat against the woman's back and felt her lungs expand. One more breath, still with him. "Hang on," he whispered. "Both of us. We just hang on." Tam. He must have slept at some point because he came back to consciousness with a jolt, sudden disorienting, his heart hammering before he even remembered where he was. The cold was still absolute. The dark was beginning to thin at the edges, the sky going from black to something that might eventually become gray. But the woman was moving. Not much. A twitch of her fingers first, then her head turning slightly. A sound in her throat, not the shallow exhale of before, but something more purposeful, more willing. "Hey," Marcus said immediately, pushing himself up on one arm. "Hey, take it easy. Don't move too fast." Her eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and for a moment they were completely unfocused, the eyes of someone returning from a very long distance. Then they sharpened, and they found him, and the expression on her face was something Marcus had never seen directed at him before in his entire life. Pure, unfiltered astonishment. "What?" She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "Who are you, Marcus Dunn?" "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Webb." She stared at him. He watched her take stock, the coat wrapped around her, the flannel shirt over her legs, the small boy pressed against the wall beside her, who was shaking so hard his teeth were clicking together in a rhythm he couldn't control. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was rough, dried out. "How long have you been?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "Since I found you, a while." "How long is a while?" He looked at the sky. "Since around 10, maybe. It's almost morning." She was quiet for a very long moment. She sat up slowly with the careful movements of someone whose body has been through something terrible and is still negotiating the terms of recovery. She reached up and touched the gash on her temple, winced, looked at the dried blood on her fingers. "You did this," she said, gesturing at the coat, the flannel, the small pocket of warmth they'd managed to create between them and the brick. "Yes, ma'am." Something moved through her face, a kind of recognition, a kind of reckoning. "You gave me your shirt," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd already understood. "You needed it more. And you stayed all night. You didn't go for help." "There wasn't time to go for help," Marcus said, "and I didn't want to leave you alone." She looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't read everything in her expression. There was too much there, too many layers, too many things happening at once. But underneath all of it, underneath the shock and the physical disorientation and whatever else was moving through her, he saw something that made his chest hurt. She looked like she was about to cry. "You're 12 years old," she said. Not an accusation, more like she was trying to locate herself in a world where that sentence was true. "Yes, ma'am." She paused. She looked at him, really looked at him. The coat that didn't fit, the boots with the soles starting to separate on the left side, the dark circles under his eyes that no 12-year-old should have. The quiet, careful way he held himself that wasn't the stillness of a child who felt safe, but the stillness of a child who had learned to take up as little space as possible. She understood. He watched her understand. "You're living out here," she said softly. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was already standing there between them, as plain and undeniable as the cold. She reached out and put her hand on the side of his face, just for a second, just briefly, the way you might touch something you're trying to confirm is real. "You saved my life," she said. "A 12-year-old homeless boy saved my life." "You would have done the same," Marcus said. And she looked at him, this hard, leather-jacketed woman with a gash on her head and blood in her hair and tears that she was refusing to let fall, and she said very quietly, "Not everyone would have." Her name, she told him, was Raven. Not her birth name. Her name. The name that mattered. The name she'd carried for 23 years. The name that meant something, that was attached to a life and a loyalty and a family that she described to him in fragments while they both sat against the wall and watched the sky go pale. She was a Hell's Angel. Marcus had heard of them. You couldn't grow up in this part of Wisconsin and not have some vague awareness of the motorcycle clubs that ran through the region. The roar of engines on summer mornings, the leather jackets in the parking lots of diners, the clusters of men and women who moved through small towns with a particular kind of collective gravity. He'd always thought of them as something apart from his world, something that existed in a different register entirely. "You're not scared of me," Raven said. It was somewhere between an observation and a question. "No, ma'am. Most people are." "Most people haven't spent a night in an alley with you," Marcus said. Something broke open in her expression. Then real, genuine, surprised laughter, the kind that comes out of you before you can think to stop it. She laughed until it turned into a cough, and then she pressed her hand to her head and winced again, but the laughter had changed something between them, dissolved the last careful distance. "You're something else, Marcus Webb," she said. "My dad used to say that." "Smart man." "He was." He paused. "He's gone now." Raven was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. And the way she said it, simple, direct, without the performance of sympathy that adults usually offered, told him that she knew what loss actually felt like, that she wasn't speaking around it. "What happened to you last night?" Marcus asked. "If you don't mind me asking." She touched her temple again. "I took a fall, ice on the road, you know how Kessler runs. My bike went out. I hit the curb, wrong, went down hard. I remember the impact, and I remember thinking I needed to get somewhere sheltered, and I made it to the alley, and then..." She stopped, shook her head. "And then you. Were you trying to make it to somewhere specific?" "The chapter house is 4 blocks east." She paused. 4 blocks. "I almost didn't make 4 blocks." "You did make it," Marcus said. "You just had a detour." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "I guess I did." He watched her pull a phone from her jacket pocket, still charged, still working, protected by the leather, and hold it in her hand for a moment, looking at the screen. 17 missed calls. He could see that much from where he sat. 17 missed calls and a string of messages filling the preview. She noticed him noticing. They've been looking for me, she said. Your family, my family, she agreed, and the word held a weight that Marcus recognized. Not the weight of biology, the weight of choice, the weight of people who stayed. She looked at him again, long and steady and with the full attention of someone who doesn't give their full attention easily. Marcus, she said, I need to make a phone call, and I need you to stay right here while I do. Something in her tone, not a warning, but a weight, a significance made his spine straighten slightly. Okay, he said. She dialed. It rang twice. A voice answered, deep, rough, already alert despite the early hour. Raven, where are you? We've been. I'm okay. Bear, she said. I'm in the alley off Kessler between the hardware store and the laundromat. I went down last night. Head injury. I'm okay, but I need you to hear something before you come. What? There's a boy, Raven said. Her voice was steady and clear, and carried something underneath it, something ceremonial, almost like she was making a declaration. 12 years old. He found me in the snow, unconscious, 15 below. He didn't leave. He stayed with me all night. He gave me the shirt off his back, bare, literally. He gave me the shirt off his back and laid down beside me and kept me alive. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the voice bear said, What's his name? Raven looked at Marcus. Marcus, she said into the phone. Marcus Webb. Another silence, shorter this time. We're on our way. She lowered the phone. Marcus watched her. He wasn't sure what had just happened exactly, but the air had changed the way air changes before a storm, when the pressure shifts and everything goes very still for one long moment before the first sound of thunder. What's about to happen? He asked. Raven looked at him, and for the first time since she had opened her eyes, she smiled fully, completely, a smile that rearranged her whole face. Something you've never seen before, she said. Something most people never see. He didn't ask anything else. He sat with her in the pale frozen morning and watched his breath make clouds in the air, and somewhere in the distance, far enough away that it was more felt than heard, a vibration in the ground beneath them, in the bricks behind them, in the marrow of his bones. He heard the first rumble of engines. Not one engine, not 10. The sound of something vast and organized and absolute rolling toward Iron Ridge from every direction, at once, like the world itself had decided to respond to what one small boy had done in the dark. Marcus Webb sat very still and listened to the sound grow. He had no idea in that moment what was coming, had no framework for it, no reference point, no way to prepare for the scale of what was about to arrive. He was a 12-year-old boy who had spent the night keeping a stranger alive because it was the right thing to do, because his father's voice had been in his ear through every cold and terrifying hour, telling him that's what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. He had done the only thing he could do, and now rolling toward him on hundreds of engines was the answer. The alley was still. The sky was the color of cold iron. And Marcus Webb, homeless and hungry and entirely without armor, sat beside the woman he'd saved and waited for a world he didn't know yet to come and find him. The rumble grew louder and louder and louder still. The first motorcycle that turned onto Kessler Street didn't slow down. It stopped. Dead stop right in front of the alley entrance engine, cutting off so abruptly that the silence it left behind felt louder than the sound had been. Marcus heard the kickstand go down, heard boots hit pavement, and then a shadow fell across the mouth of the alley, a big shadow, the kind that belongs to a man who fills a doorframe without trying. Bear was not what Marcus expected. He didn't know exactly what he'd expected. Something from a movie, maybe something theatrical and exaggerated, but the man who walked into that alley was none of those things. He was maybe 50 broad through the shoulders, with a beard going gray at the edges and eyes that were doing about 6 things at once, checking Raven, reading the alley, clocking, Marcus calculating, assessing, concluding. He moved fast for a big man. He was on one knee beside Raven in 4 strides. Let me see, he said, and it wasn't a request. He tilted her chin up with 2 fingers, examined the gash on her temple with the focused, unsentimental attention of someone who had seen injuries before and knew the difference between bad and catastrophic. You need stitches. I've needed stitches before, Raven said. You've needed stitches before, and you didn't spend the night at 15 below before, Bear said. He pulled back and looked at her. Really looked at her the way you look at someone you almost lost. Something moved through his expression and then got locked back down. You scared the hell out of us. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me. He straightened up, and then he turned and his eyes landed on Marcus and they stayed there. Marcus didn't move. He'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do when a large, unknown man was looking at you was flinch. So he held still and met Bear's gaze and waited. Bear looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the coat, Marcus's coat, back on Marcus now. Raven having insisted he take it back the moment her fingers were working well enough. He looked at the flannel shirt still tucked around Raven's legs. He looked at Marcus's hands, which were chapped and red and shaking in a way Marcus was trying to control and failing. He looked at Marcus's face, which was 12 years old and exhausted and doing its level best to appear calm. "You're Marcus," Bear said. "Yes, sir." "You stayed with her all night?" "Yes, sir." Bear was quiet for a moment. Then he said very simply, "Why?" Marcus blinked. Of all the things he'd anticipated, questions about what happened, questions about where his parents were, questions about what he was doing alone in an alley at midnight, that was not the one he'd prepared for. "Because she would have died," Marcus said, "if I left her. And that was enough for you. You didn't know her. She's a stranger." "My dad said strangers are just people you haven't met yet." Marcus paused. "And she wasn't a stranger by the time morning came." Bear looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he turned back to Raven and said in a completely different tone, low direct, the tone of a decision being made, "Get her to dock, now." He pulled out his phone, and then he said 4 words that Marcus would not fully understand for another 2 hours. He said them quietly but with a weight that seemed to press against the air itself. "Send the word out." Raven looked up at him sharply. "Bear." "Don't," he said, not unkindly, just final. "You know the code, Raven. You know what this means. The boy saved your life. That's not something we walk past." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. Bear put the phone to his ear and started talking, and Marcus stood there in the cold and understood in the vague and incomplete way that you understand things before you have the context to fully grasp them, that something had just been set in motion that was much larger than one alley in Iron Ridge, Wisconsin. 2 more men appeared at the mouth of the alley, then a woman. They moved in with the coordinated efficiency of people who were used to emergencies, used to each other, used to acting without a lot of discussion. One of them had a blanket, a real one, heavy and thermal. Another had a first aid kit already open. They got Raven to her feet, carefully wrapped her, checked her pupils, spoke to her in low-clipped sentences. And through all of it, Bear stood slightly apart watching Marcus, not in a threatening way. In the way of someone who is trying to figure out how to do something that doesn't have an obvious procedure. "Are you hurt?" Bear finally asked. "No, sir." "You're shaking." "I'm cold," Marcus said. "I'll be fine." "When did you last eat?" The question landed differently than Bear probably intended it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was direct and because the honest answer was embarrassing in a way that Marcus hadn't learned to be comfortable with yet. He looked away for a second. "Yesterday morning," he said, "I had part of a granola bar." Silence. Bear didn't make a sound. He didn't say anything at all. He just reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a protein bar, the kind that gas stations sell, dense and calorie-packed, and held it out. Marcus took it. His hands were shaking badly enough now that he fumbled the wrapper, and he hated showing the weakness, but he was too hungry to care enough to stop. He got it open and ate half in 2 bites and then forced himself to slow down because he'd learned the hard way what eating too fast on an empty stomach did to you. Bear watched him eat without comment. That somehow was the kindest thing he could have done. "How long?" Bear asked after a moment. The question was incomplete, but Marcus understood it perfectly. 8 months, Marcus said. "You're 12. "Yes, sir." "Where are your people?" Marcus chewed, swallowed, looked up. "My dad died 2 years ago. My mom left when I was 6. Foster system didn't stick." He said it plainly without drama, the way you talk about something you've had enough time to stop being surprised by. "It's just me." Bear looked at him for a long time, and then he did something that Marcus didn't expect at all. He sat down. Right there on the cold ground of the alley, the chapter president of an MC that stretched across 3 states sat down on the pavement and put himself at eye level with a 12-year-old boy. "Your father," Bear said, "he taught you to stop for people in trouble." It wasn't a question. He'd read it somehow from the things Marcus had said and the way he'd said them. "Every time," Marcus said. He never walked past anyone. And you didn't walk past Raven. No, sir. Even though you had nothing. Even though it cost you. It cost me a shirt, Marcus said. She almost lost everything. Bear was very still for a moment. Then he said quietly enough that only Marcus could hear. Your father raised a man, Marcus Webb. He just raised him 12 years too early. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, not dramatically, not in a way he could have described, just a sudden, unbearable ache, the specific pain of being seen accurately by someone who had no reason to look closely. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ground and breathed through it. He would not cry in front of this man. Not because of pride, because he genuinely didn't think his body had the moisture to spare. Bear stood up. His hand came down briefly on Marcus's shoulder, one firm, solid moment of contact. Then he moved to the mouth of the alley, and Marcus heard him on the phone again, and this time he caught more of the words. Iron Ridge, yeah. Kessler and Maine, basically. I want everyone who can make it. No, not a few Decker. Everyone. The kid has nothing. He spent the night in the cold keeping our sister alive with the shirt off his back. He's 12 years old, and he's been surviving alone for 8 months. We do this right. A pause. How many can we get by morning? Bear said. And then good. Get them moving. He lowered the phone, turned back, and found Marcus standing directly behind him, having moved without fully deciding to. What's happening? Marcus asked. Bear looked at him straight. We have a code, he said. In this club, when someone saves the life of one of our own, really saves it at real cost to themselves, that person comes under our protection. That's not a figure of speech. That's law. Marcus absorbed this. What does that mean exactly? It means you're not alone anymore, Bear said. Yeah. It means we respond, all of us, all of you, Marcus repeated. How many is that? Bear's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the territory right next to one. How does 4,000 sound? Marcus stared at him. That's not a real number. It's a real number. 4,000 bikers are coming to Iron Ridge. 4,000 bikers, Bear said calmly, are already on their way. Marcus turned this over in his mind, tried to fit it into his understanding of the world, and found that it didn't fit, that the architecture of everything he knew about his own life, invisible, discarded, forgotten, had no room for a number like that, had no room for what it meant. He stood there in the mouth of the alley in Iron Ridge, Wisconsin at 6:30 in the morning and felt the ground shift under his feet in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. What? He asked. It came out smaller than he intended. Bear looked at him. Because what you did matters, he said. Because somebody has to say so out loud. And because you're 12 years old and you've been fighting alone for 8 months and nobody should have to do that. And if we can do something about it, we will. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't need anyone to. I know you don't need it, Bear said. That's not why we're doing it. He paused. We're doing it because you deserve it. There's a difference. And Marcus Webb, who had been managing on his own for so long that independence had started to feel like identity, stood very still while that sentence rearranged something fundamental inside him. He didn't have an answer for it, so he just nodded once and turned and faced the street. And that's when he heard it, not the rumble from before, the distant, ambiguous vibration that might have been anything. This was specific and directional and growing by the second, coming from the north end of Kessler Street, a sound like organized thunder, like a whole weather system deciding to take a road trip. The first wave came around the corner in a column of 12 riding tight and deliberate headlights cutting through the gray morning. They pulled up along the curb and stopped one after another, the sequence of engines cutting off, creating a percussion all its own. Doors of nearby buildings were already opening. People in pajamas, people with coffee cups, people with that particular morning face of someone who has been startled out of routine into something they don't yet have language for. More came. The column turned into a stream. By the time the first 12 had settled, 30 more were rounding the corner. Then 50. The sound built in layers, each wave adding to what was already there until the whole street was vibrating and the windows of the hardware store were humming in their frames, and Marcus could feel the sound in his sternum, in his back teeth, and the soles of his feet. He realized he was holding his breath. Raven appeared at his shoulder. She'd been cleaned up quickly. The gash on her temple had been properly bandaged. Someone had given her a heavier jacket, and she moved with more steadiness than she had 20 minutes ago. She stood beside Marcus and watched the street with him. How are you feeling? Marcus asked. Like I should be dead, she said. But I'm not, because of you. Don't keep saying that. I'll say it every day for the rest of my life if I want to, she said. Not dramatic, just decided. You don't get to tell me what this meant to me. He glanced at her. She was watching the arriving bikes with an expression that was complicated and layered pride gratitude, something that might have been love in the large collective sense. This was her family arriving. All of them. Because of what had happened to her. Because of what he had done. They're all coming because of me, Marcus said. He said it quietly, like testing the sentence to see if it would hold weight. Because of what you did, Raven corrected. Big difference. One is about you existing. The other is about you choosing. He thought about that. My dad chose too, he said. Choosing got him killed. And choosing saved me, Raven said. She let that sit for a moment. The choice isn't always safe, Marcus, but it's always worth making. Your father knew that, and you know it too, or you wouldn't have stayed last night. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The street in front of them was answering for him, the continuous arrival of riders who had left warm beds and made long drives on frozen roads to come to a town most of them had never heard of, for a boy none of them had ever met. One of the newly arrived riders, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and road dust still on her jacket, walked directly up to Raven and embraced her without a word, the grip fierce and sustained, the embrace of someone who has just been reminded that people they love can disappear. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. You scared us, she said. I know, Raven said. I'm here. The woman looked at Marcus. This him. This is Marcus Webb, Raven said. The woman who later he would learn was called Sable, 15-year member of the chapter, former Army medic, not someone whose emotions were generally available for public inspection, looked at him with eyes that were still bright. She held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was dry and firm and real. You did a brave thing, she said. A really brave thing. I just didn't leave, Marcus said. Son Sable said, you'd be amazed how rare that is. She released his hand and moved off, joining the growing cluster of riders who were sorting themselves with the practiced efficiency of a group that was used to assembling, used to forming order out of arrival. Marcus watched them and tried to comprehend the logistics of what was happening. Hundreds of people coordinated deliberate converging on this specific corner at this specific hour because a phone call had gone out 4 hours ago, and everyone who received it had said yes. Everyone. Bear reappeared beside him. The town's waking up, he said, nodding toward the growing number of people on sidewalks and in doorways. Are they going to be upset? Marcus asked. He was thinking about the noise, the numbers, the sheer physical mass of what was assembling on Kessler Street. He was thinking about how this town had mostly ignored him for 8 months, and now it was being impossible to ignore. Ignore is on his behalf, and there was something vertiginous about that. Some of them might be confused at first, Bear said, but people figure things out. And when they figure out what this is, when they understand what you did and why we're here, he paused. People mostly want to be on the right side of things, Marcus. They just need to see what the right side is. A man Marcus hadn't seen before materialized out of the assembling crowd and spoke quietly into Bear's ear. Bear listened, his jaw tightened slightly. He turned to Marcus. There's something we need to talk about, Bear said. Something important. Marcus straightened. Okay. There are people here, journalists. Word travels fast when 4,000 bikes move in the same direction. Someone's going to want to talk to you. Cameras, questions. He looked at Marcus steadily. You don't have to do any of that if you don't want to. You don't owe anyone your story, but I want you to know it might happen. I want you to be prepared. Marcus considered this. The idea of cameras, of attention, of being looked at by people he didn't know, it pulled at every instinct for invisibility he'd spent 8 months developing. He'd learned to be unseen. He'd learned to take up no space. The idea of the opposite was physically uncomfortable. But then he thought about the other kids, the ones still out there, the ones on other park benches in other towns finding half granola bars in other cold places with no one coming for them. Not yet. If talking about it means it helps someone else, Marcus said slowly, then I'll talk. Bear looked at him. You sure? My dad would say that if something hard happened to you and you get the chance to use it to help somebody else, then you don't waste that. You don't keep it. Marcus looked up at him. I'm not going to keep it. Something in Bear's face shifted deeply. He nodded once, slow and final, and the engines kept coming. The sound by now was less a sound than a phenomenon, something total and encompassing that had ceased to be background and become the entire foreground of the morning. People on the sidewalk had stopped trying to continue whatever they'd been doing and were simply standing watching, trying to understand the scale of what was assembling. Children were pressing their faces against windows. A man in a diner apron stood in the doorway of the coffee shop 2 buildings down and then made a decision, went back inside and came back out with a cardboard tray of cups as he walked wordlessly toward the cluster of riders nearest him. Bear noticed. He touched Marcus's arm and pointed. "You see that? He's bringing them coffee," Marcus said. "He didn't have to do that." "No. But he saw what this was," Bear said, "and he wanted to be part of it. That's what one right action creates, Marcus. It doesn't stay contained, it spreads." He looked at the boy beside him. "You started this, last night in that alley. You just couldn't see it yet." Marcus watched the man with the coffees move through the crowd, watched riders accept cups with nods and thanks, watched the small, spontaneous act ripple outward into handshakes and conversations, in the beginning of something that looked surprisingly like community. He thought about his father pulling over in the rain on Highway 14. He thought about what that decision had cost. And then he thought about what was standing on Kessler Street at 7 in the morning, what had assembled in the dark and the cold and the hours before dawn because one 12-year-old boy had made the same kind of decision in the same kind of dark. And for the first time in 2 years, maybe longer, Marcus didn't think about his father's choice as only a loss. He thought about it as a continuation, as a thing passed down, as a thing impossibly still alive and moving in the world. He was still standing there, working through that thought, when Bear's phone rang again. Bear answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and then his expression shifted into something that Marcus couldn't read. Something complex, something that held both weight and a kind of carefully contained urgency. He lowered the phone slowly. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah, there's something you need to know." Bear turned to face him fully. "Something Raven told me this morning, something I've been confirming for the last hour." He paused. "We know where you've been staying. We know about the shelter system in this county, and we know what happened with your placement, and we know." He stopped himself, recalibrated. "What I'm trying to say is we've been asking questions, because that's what you do when someone matters to you. And Marcus," he held the boy's gaze, "you matter to us, already. That's not going to be a short-term thing." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He pushed past it. "What are you saying?" Bear said it simply without preamble, because this was not a man who dressed things up. "We're not leaving here today without making sure you have somewhere to go. Not a shelter, not a placement, somewhere real, somewhere safe. We're going to fix this today." He paused. "If that's okay with you." Marcus looked at him, looked at the street behind him, at the hundreds of riders who were still arriving at Raven, who had appeared again at Bear's shoulder, and was watching him with those dark, steady eyes that had looked at him in the alley and told him the truth without dressing it up. He had been alone for 8 months. He had learned to be alone, had built systems around it, habits around it, a whole internal architecture of self-sufficiency that he'd been genuinely proud of in the private way you're proud of surviving something that should have finished you. And now this man was standing in front of him, saying the word somewhere, saying the word real, saying the word safe, which was a word Marcus hadn't applied to his own situation in so long, it almost didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. His voice, when it came, was smaller than he wanted it to be. "Yeah," Marcus said, "that's okay with me." And the engines rumbled on, and the street filled, and the morning cold and gray and full of iron light held all of it, the boy, the woman he'd saved the hundreds, becoming thousands, the coffee cups being passed hand to hand, the doors opening all up and down Kessler Street, as Iron Ridge, Wisconsin slowly woke up to the fact that something extraordinary had happened in the dark, and the world had noticed, and the world had come. The word spread through Iron Ridge the way fire spreads through dry grass. Not gradually, not politely, but all at once in every direction, simultaneously unstoppable, before most people even registered that something was burning. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the diner on Commerce Street had run out of coffee twice and was brewing a third pot with the focused urgency of a field hospital. The owner, a heavy-set woman named Dolores, who had operated that diner for 31 years and believed she had seen everything this town was capable of producing, stood behind her counter and watched through the window as the street outside continued to fill, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The specific electric quality of a moment that knows it's historic while it's still happening. Her waitress, 19 years old and 3 months into the job, came and stood beside her. "How many do you think there are?" she asked. "More than yesterday," Dolores said. "More every minute." The waitress watched a cluster of riders accept cups from a man with a cardboard tray and felt something she couldn't name settle in her chest. What are they here for? Dolores had heard by then enough pieces of the story to understand the shape of it. She'd heard it from the man who'd brought the coffees, who'd heard it from a rider who'd gotten it directly from someone who'd been on Kessler Street at first light. She knew about the boy. She knew about the alley. She knew about the night. "They're here," Dolores said quietly, "because a 12-year-old homeless kid did something extraordinary, and nobody was going to just let that go unremarked." The waitress was quiet for a moment. Then she untied her apron, reached under the counter for the diner's emergency cash box, the one Dolores kept for the situations that didn't have a menu category, and looked at her boss. "Can I take this out there?" Dolores looked at her for 1 second. "Take the whole box," she said. Marcus didn't know any of that was happening yet. He was sitting in the back of a running SUV that one of the riders had warmed up for him, his hands wrapped around a cup of something hot that had been pressed into them by a woman who introduced herself as Tracker and didn't explain whether that was a name or a description. He was eating real food, a breakfast sandwich that someone had produced from somewhere, the kind with egg and cheese and meat that tasted more expensive than anything he'd had in 8 months, and he was trying to eat it at a dignified pace and failing completely. Raven sat across from him. She'd insisted on that. Wherever Marcus went for the next hour, she was going too. "You need to rest," Marcus told her, because her color still wasn't quite right, and she was moving with the controlled, deliberate care of someone managing pain. "I'll rest when you're settled," she said. "That's not Marcus." She fixed him with a look that ended the sentence. "Let people take care of you. I know it's not something you were practiced at. Practice it anyway." He looked at her. "Is that hard for you too?" he asked. "Being taken care of?" She blinked. Then something shifted in her expression, a small, genuine surprise, the kind that comes when someone younger than you asks a question sharper than you expected. "Yeah," she admitted. "Yeah, it is." "How do you get used to it?" "You remind yourself that accepting help isn't weakness," Raven said. "It's just trust, deployed in a specific direction." She paused. "You trusted me enough to stay last night. I was unconscious and you stayed. That's a kind of care too." That was different. "How?" Marcus thought about it. "I had control of that. I made the decision. This," he gestured vaguely at the SUV, the food, the street full of people outside the window. "This is happening to me." "Welcome to relationships," Raven said. And there was something so dry and genuine about the way she said it that Marcus laughed, actually laughed, a real one, startled out of him, and the sound of it surprised both of them. And Raven's whole face changed in response to it, opening up like a window suddenly unlatched. "There he is," she said softly. "What?" "The kid under all the armor." She smiled at him. "Nice to meet you properly." He looked away, looked out the window, and saw Bear moving through the crowd toward the SUV with the specific, purposeful stride of a man who has a development to report. Bear knocked once on the window. Marcus rolled it down. "We need to talk about the next few hours," Bear said. He wasn't framing it as an option. "There's a formal gathering being organized. The whole assembly together, proper acknowledgement. You'll need to be there." "Acknowledge for what?" Marcus said. "I keep telling people I didn't do anything special." "And we keep telling you that you did," Bear said, without patience but without frustration. "Just fact. You don't get to decide what your actions mean to other people, Marcus. You only get to decide what you do. You've already done it. Now let the rest of us respond." Marcus looked at him. "What exactly does a formal gathering mean?" "It means 4,000 bikers standing in formation on the main street of Iron Ridge," Bear said. "It means I stand in front of all of them and tell them what you did and why it matters. And it means you stand next to me while I do it." The silence in the SUV lasted about 4 seconds. 4,000 people looking at me," Marcus said. 4,000 people honoring you," Bear corrected. "I don't..." Marcus stopped, started again. I'm not good at being looked at. I know, Bear said. You've been invisible on purpose. I understand why. But Marcus, he leaned against the doorframe and his voice dropped to the register he seemed to reserve for things that really mattered. There are kids out there right now in the same situation you were in last night. And if what you did gets told, right? If it gets seen, if it gets heard, some of those kids might get found before it's too late for them. You being looked at today isn't just about you. You understand. Marcus understood. He'd known it on some level since that morning, since he'd told Bear he'd talk to cameras if it helped someone else. He'd known it in the abstract. Now Bear was making it specific and immediate and real, and the weight of it settled differently on his shoulders when it was specific and immediate and real. He handed the breakfast sandwich to Raven, who raised an eyebrow. Hold that, he said. I need a minute. He got out of the SUV. The cold hit him again immediately, that clean knife-sharp cold of Wisconsin January that Marcus had stopped registering as a sensation and started registering simply as the permanent condition of existing outdoors. He stood beside the car and looked up the length of Kessler Street at the columns of riders and the people on sidewalks and the sound and the scale of everything that had converged on this ordinary corner, and he tried to find in himself whatever it was going to take to walk through it. He thought about his father. He thought about James Webb standing on the shoulder of Highway 14 in the rain, getting out of his car to help a stranger not knowing that a truck was coming around a curve. He thought about whether his father had been afraid. He thought about what his father would have said if he could see this morning. He thought his father would have said, "Look at what one right decision made Mark. Look at all of it." He took a breath, let it out slowly. The cold air made it visible, a small white cloud dispersing in the gray morning. "Okay," he said to no one in particular. "Okay." He turned back to the SUV. Raven was watching him through the window with those dark, steady eyes. He nodded at her once. She nodded back once. The language of people who have already been through something hard together and don't need a lot of words. He walked toward Bear. "When does it start?" he asked. 30 minutes, Bear said. "I need you cleaned up first. Dry clothes. Food that you actually finish." He looked at Marcus pointedly. "I was eating at a normal pace. You were inhaling a sandwich at a speed that suggests 8 months of practice," Bear said. "There's no judgment in that. It's just a fact. Come on." What happened next was the kind of thing that Marcus would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite succeeding because it had a quality that language didn't map onto well. In the space of 30 minutes in a motel room that Bear had apparently acquired through the simple expedient of explaining the situation to the front desk manager, who had comped it immediately, and without hesitation, Marcus was given dry clothes, not donated, not charity box, but new tags still on, in his actual size because someone had looked at him and estimated correctly in a real breakfast that he ate sitting at an actual table in a few minutes of quiet that nobody intruded on. He sat in that quiet and tried to memorize it the way you memorize something you think might be temporary, something you're not sure will stay. He was afraid somewhere underneath everything else to trust it. He'd been in good situations before. He'd been in the foster placement that felt stable for 3 weeks and then collapsed. He'd been at the group home that had a decent man running it until the decent man left and someone different came. He'd been in enough situations that had started promising and ended badly that his instincts had been recalibrated towards suspicion of anything that felt good. He knew that. He knew he was doing it. He made himself do it anyway, the suspicion, the internal bracing, because that was what kept you functional when the floor went out again. But he also made himself deliberately with intention, the way his father had taught him to do things on purpose rather than by accident. He made himself notice the warmth, the weight of real clothes, the taste of food that was hot all the way through, the simple, staggering luxury of being in a room where nobody was going to tell him to leave. Notice the good things, Marcus. When they're in front of you, don't spend the whole meal worrying about when it ends. His father's voice, clear as anything. He finished his breakfast. When he came outside, the gathering had already begun to take shape. Bear had organized it with the efficiency of long practice riders, arranged in formation along both sides of the street, facing inward, creating a corridor that ran for 2 blocks. The numbers were staggering up close in a way they hadn't been from the window of the SUV. Row after row of people in leather still and organized, the rumble of engines silenced now. so that the only sounds were footsteps and voices and the occasional radio call being coordinated somewhere at the perimeter. Marcus walked out, and the crowd on the nearest side became aware of him, and a ripple went through the formation, not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in attention, a collective orienting the way a field of sunflowers all turned the same direction. He felt it physically. It moved across his skin. He kept walking. Raven fell into step on his left, Bear on his right, and they walked him down the corridor, and the riders on both sides watched him pass, and some of them nodded, and some of them had expressions on their faces that Marcus couldn't look at directly because they were too full, the expressions of people who were feeling something large. At the center of the formation, Bear stopped. He turned to face the assembly, and the last of the ambient conversation cut out. The silence was absolute. Bear didn't use a microphone. He didn't need one. His voice, trained by years of addressing large groups in outdoor spaces, carried with the natural authority of someone who expected to be heard. "Most of you got a phone call last night," Bear began. "A short one. You got a name, Raven, and you got 4 words, send the word out. And you came. All of you came without knowing the whole story because that's what we do. Because that's who we are." He paused. "Now you're going to hear the whole story." He told it simply. No embellishment, no theatrics, just the facts in the order they'd happened. The alley, the temperature, the unconscious woman, the 12-year-old boy with nothing to his name who had stopped and knelt down and made a choice. He told them about the shirt. He told them about the body heat. He told them about the pulse check and the counting of breaths and the hours of cold and the boys staying through every single one of them. The formation stood in complete silence for the entire duration. Marcus, standing at the center of it, realized he had stopped breathing normally somewhere around the part about the shirt and had been taking short, shallow breaths for several minutes. He forced himself to breathe. He looked at the ground. He looked at his hands. He looked at anything except the faces around him. Then Bear said, "His name is Marcus Webb. He is 12 years old. He has been surviving alone on the streets of Iron Ridge for 8 months. He had nothing last night. He gave what nothing he had to keep our sister alive." Bear paused. "And I want to say something directly to him right now." Marcus looked up. He couldn't not. "Marcus," Bear said, "what you did last night isn't something we were going to let disappear. You are not invisible. You were never invisible. The world just wasn't looking in the right place. We're looking now, all of us." He held the boy's gaze. "You are under our protection. That is permanent. That is a promise from every person standing in this street. 4,000 people. None of them moved. None of them spoke." And then, beginning on the right side of the formation closest to where Marcus was standing, one rider removed his right glove and put his fist over his heart. Then the rider beside him did the same. Then the next. It moved down the line like a current, not a wave, not a performance, but something deliberate and measured and unanimous. Each person making the same gesture in their own time. A whole crowd choosing the same motion the way a crowd can sometimes choose the same silence. It traveled the full length of the formation, 4,000 individual decisions arriving at the same destination. And Marcus stood at the center of it and felt something happen inside him that he didn't have the vocabulary for at 12, but that he would spend the rest of his life trying to articulate. He felt found, not rescued, not pitied, not charity-cased, found. Like something lost that the world had suddenly decided to look for, and then locate, and then in this specific, extraordinary, unprecedented morning bring home. His eyes burned. He pressed his lips together hard. His jaw was shaking, and he told it to stop, and it didn't stop. Raven beside him put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She just put her hand there and kept it there, and let him feel what he needed to feel without trying to manage it or abbreviate it or turn it into something more comfortable. He cried, not dramatically, not collapsing, just tears quiet and continuous running down his face in the cold air and freezing slightly at the gush while 4,000 people held their fists over their hearts and watched a 12-year-old boy feel for the first time in 2 years like someone was glad he existed. Bear let it breathe. Let the moment hold itself as long as it needed to. Then he spoke again. "We're not done," he said. "There's more." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced something that Marcus couldn't immediately identify, a vest leather, unpatched the kind that riders wore as the foundation before the insignia went on. He held it up so the formation could see it. The crowd responded with a sound, not a cheer, exactly more like a collective exhale, a collective recognition. They knew what this was. In our tradition, Bear said when someone earns the designation of guardian, someone who protects one of our own at genuine when cost to themselves, they receive a vest, and every member present signs it. He looked at Marcus. We've been doing this for 40 years. In 40 years, we have done it 11 times. He paused. Today is the 12th. Marcus stared at the vest. You don't have to be a member, Bear said, quickly reading his expression. This isn't an induction. This is a recognition. This vest says one thing, that you belong to us and we belong to you. That wherever you go, whatever you need, you have 4,000 people who will answer if you call. He stepped forward and held the vest out. If you'll accept it. Marcus looked at it. He looked at Bear. He looked at Raven, who was watching him with those wet eyes she kept refusing to let overflow. He looked at the formation, at the rows of people who had driven through the frozen dark to be here, all of them waiting for a 12-year-old boy to decide whether he was willing to stop being alone. He thought about his father. He thought about what it meant to receive something gracefully, to let a gift land without deflecting it, to say yes to the world when the world offered something good. He thought, Dad, look at this. Look at what you taught me. Look at where it brought me. He reached out and took the vest. The formation erupted, not chaos, not noise for its own sake, but the organized, full-throated sound of hundreds of people expressing something that had been building in them since they'd gotten a phone call in the dark and driven to a town they'd never heard of for a boy they didn't know, and understood now completely why they'd come. Bear helped Marcus put the vest on over his new coat. It was too big, adult-sized, reaching almost to his hips, and he would grow into it in the coming years in ways neither of them knew yet. But it settled on his shoulders, and it felt impossibly exactly right. Then Bear produced a marker. He signed the left chest panel, handed the marker to Raven. She signed above Bear's signature. She passed it to Sable, who passed it down the line, and what happened next took 40 minutes and was one of the most extraordinary things anyone in Iron Ridge had ever witnessed. A 12-year-old boy standing in a street while 4,000 people took turns walking up to him and signing their names on a leather vest, each one making brief eye contact, each one saying something or saying nothing, the signatures accumulating until the entire surface of the vest was covered in ink. Midway through, around the 20-minute mark, when Marcus's arm was tired from holding the vest out and his face hurt from the combination of crying and cold and the sustained effort of being present for something this large, a woman stopped in front of him, middle-aged, heavy-set, road-worn, in the way that meant decades, not miles. She signed her name. Then she looked at him and said, I lost a kid like you once, street kid. 15. We didn't find him in time. Her voice was level. She held his gaze. I've been looking for a way to do something about that ever since. Your story's going to help. Marcus held her gaze. I'm sorry about your kid, he said. Don't be sorry, she said. Be the reason it doesn't happen to the next one. She squeezed his arm once, moved on. He stood straighter after that. The weight on his shoulders felt different, not lighter, but more purposeful, like a thing he'd been chosen to carry rather than a thing that had landed on him by accident. The last signature went on the vest at exactly 9:47 in the morning. Bear capped the marker, looked at the vest, at the boy wearing it, at the writing covering every available surface of the leather. 4,001 signatures, Bear said. Yours will be the last, right here. He pointed to the center of the back panel, which had been left deliberately blank. He held out the marker. Marcus took it. He'd never been asked to sign something that mattered before, had never had a name worth putting somewhere permanent. He uncapped the marker and he wrote in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a boy who'd been taught that your name was the one thing in the world that was entirely yours. Marcus J. Webb. The J was for James. He capped the marker. He handed it back. He stood very still for a moment with his eyes on his own name on the back of a vest covered in the signatures of 4,000 people who had come for him in the dark, and he felt his father's name under his fingertips like a pulse. What does the J stand for? Bear asked. James, Marcus said. My dad. Bear nodded. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. The formation began to dissolve into smaller groups. Some riders heading toward the diner, some clustered in conversations on the sidewalk. The organized assembly breaking naturally into the organized community. It always was underneath the formality. The sound of engines began again in ones and twos as people moved vehicles rearranged, settled into the longer-term business of a day that was not yet over. Marcus stood in the middle of all of it, wearing a vest covered in 4,000 names, and watched Iron Ridge rearrange itself around something that had happened in an alley overnight and changed the entire shape of the morning. A reporter appeared at the edge of the gathering, young, nervous camera operator hovering. She made eye contact with Marcus from 20 feet away, clearly wanting to approach, clearly uncertain whether to. He made a decision. He walked toward her. Bear saw it happen and fell in beside him without being asked. Raven on the other side the same way. The three of them walking together toward the camera in the cold morning light, and Marcus thought, this is what it looks like. This is what his father's lesson looked like, scaled up in the world, alive and moving and impossible to ignore. He stopped in front of the reporter. She had her microphone out, but her expression was the expression of someone who had not expected the subject to come to her, and she was recalibrating in real time. "You're Marcus Webb," she said. "Yes," he said. "Can I ask you some questions?" He thought about the kids in other alleys, the ones not yet found, the ones on benches with half granola bars in their pockets, doing math about what they could survive. "Yes," he said again. "You can." The camera light came on, and Marcus Webb, 12 years old, wearing a vest covered in 4,000 names, with his father's initial written across the center of his own, stood in the cold street of Iron Ridge, Wisconsin, and told the truth about what one night in an alley had cost him and what it had made and what he believed could still be done. The camera rolled. The engines rumbled in the background. The world for the first time listened. The reporter's name was Dana Cho. She was 26 years old, 8 months into her first real job at a regional news station out of Green Bay, and she had driven to Iron Ridge that morning because her scanner had picked up unusual radio traffic about a large motorcycle gathering, and her editor had said, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been wrong about stories before, probably nothing but go. She had arrived expecting a noise complaint. She had found something she didn't have a category for. She held the microphone steady and looked at Marcus and said, "Can you tell me in your own words what happened last night?" Marcus looked at the camera for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Dana instead, because looking at a person was easier than looking at a lens, and he'd learned already that morning that easier was not the same as weak. "I found a woman in the snow," he said. "She wasn't moving. It was 15 below. I knew if I left her, she'd be dead by morning." He paused. "So I didn't leave." Dana waited. A good reporter's instinct let the silence ask the follow-up. "I stayed with her through the night," Marcus continued. "I gave her my shirt because she was losing heat faster than me. I kept checking her breathing, and in the morning she woke up." He said it simply, the way you report a fact that you are still on some level surprised is true. "You're 12 years old," Dana said. "Yes." "And you've been living on the street." 8 months, Marcus said. Dana absorbed that. On camera, her expression stayed professional, but Marcus could see something move through her eyes. The thing that moves through people's eyes when they are in the presence of a reality they knew existed in the abstract, but have never stood directly in front of before. "Were you scared?" she asked. Marcus thought about it. He didn't give her the easy answer, the performed courage answer that would have been cleaner but less true. "Yes," he said. "I was cold and I was scared, and I wanted to keep moving because moving felt safer. But my dad always said that what you do when you're scared is what actually counts. Any fool can do the right thing when it's easy." "Your father," Dana said, "he taught you this." "He taught me everything," Marcus said. "He's gone now. But the things he taught me, they're not gone." He paused, looked briefly at the vest he was wearing, at the ink-covered leather. "I think last night proved that." Dana glanced at the vest, at the signatures covering every surface of it. "Can you tell me about what happened this morning?" "All of these people, they came for me," Marcus said. And then he stopped himself because Bear's correction was already in his head. "They came because of what I did. There's a difference." He looked directly into the camera for the first time. "But I need to say something to whoever's watching, because I'm not the only kid out there. Right now, tonight, there are kids sleeping in alleys and under bridges and in cars and on benches in every city in this country. And nobody came for them yet. Nobody sent the word out, and I don't know how to fix all of that. I'm 12, but I know that this morning something happened in Iron Ridge that doesn't happen very often. People showed up. 4,000 people showed up. His voice was steady. He hadn't rehearsed this. It was just what was true. I want other kids to know that showing up is possible, that it can happen, that someone might come. Dana lowered the microphone for a half second. The camera operator, a man in his 40s who had been doing this job long enough to be largely unmoved by it, turned and it looked at his colleague with an expression that said, "Are you getting this? Are you getting all of this?" She was. Bear, standing off to Marcus's right, watched the interview happen and felt something move through his chest that he would have had difficulty naming out loud, being a man who preferred action to articulation. But it was something close to reverence, the specific reverence you feel when you watch someone very young carry something very heavy with the kind of grace that takes most people decades to develop, if they develop it at all. Raven stood beside him. She was watching Marcus too. "He's going to be something," she said quietly. "He already is something," Bear said. "You know what I mean?" "Yeah." Bear was quiet for a moment. "His father did that. You can see it. The father is in every word out of that kid's mouth." Raven nodded slowly. "We need to make sure what happens next is worthy of it," she said. "The housing, the school, all of it. We can't do this publicly and then let it fall apart privately. That's not okay." "It's not going to fall apart," Bear said. "I need you to mean that." "I mean it," Bear said. And the way he said it, no embellishment, no qualification, made it a different kind of statement than a promise. It was a declaration of fact about what the future was going to be, delivered with the certainty of someone who intended to enforce it personally. The interview wrapped up 12 minutes later. Dana thanked Marcus, and he nodded, and she held her hand out, and he shook it, and she said, "This is going to air tonight, the 6 o'clock and the 10 o'clock both." She paused. "I want you to know what you said at the end, about the other kids. That's going to be the part people remember." Marcus looked at her. "Good," he said. "That's the part that matters." She nodded once, turned, spoke quietly to her camera operator, and they both moved off toward the edge of the gathering with the purposeful energy of people who had a story and knew exactly what to do with it. Marcus turned back to Bear. "What happens now?" he asked. And Bear said, with the directness Marcus had come to appreciate as the man's primary mode, "Now we deal with the practical things. And the practical things are going to feel less dramatic than this morning, but they matter more." He wasn't wrong. What followed the ceremony, the assembly, the interview, what followed, all the extraordinary public architecture of that morning, was something quieter and more consequential. Bear sat Marcus down in the diner on Commerce Street at a corner table in the back, away from the crowd, and laid out what had been arranged in the hours before dawn, while Marcus was sleeping in a motel room and the riders were still arriving. "There's a family," Bear said. "Tom and Elaine Garrett. He's retired iron worker. She taught 4th grade for 22 years. Their own kids are grown out of the house. They live 12 minutes from Iron Ridge in Dalton. They've been licensed foster parents for 4 years. They've had 3 kids through their home. All 3 transitioned out to permanent situations because Tom and Elaine are good at what they do." He watched Marcus's face. "They heard about you this morning. They called our contact at the county welfare office at 6:45 a.m. before we even asked them. They called first." Marcus absorbed this. "They called first," he repeated. "First," Bear confirmed. Why, Bear looked at him. "Because Elaine Garrett listened to the story and cried for 20 minutes and then said to her husband, 'We're not letting that boy spend another night outside Tom.' And Tom said, 'No, we're not.' And then she called." He paused. "Some people are just decent, Marcus. It's not complicated. The world has more of them than you've been able to see from where you've been standing." Marcus stared at the table, at the coffee cup in front of him that he hadn't touched. "What if it doesn't work?" he asked. It came out more quietly than he intended, more nakedly. Bear didn't rush to reassure him. He gave the question the respect of sitting with it for a moment. "Then we find something that does," he said. "That's not a guarantee that this specific placement is perfect. I don't make guarantees I can't control, but I guarantee that we don't walk away. We stay involved. Raven visits, I check in. You have the vest, and everyone who signed that vest is a phone call away." He leaned forward slightly. "You are not going back to a situation where nobody knows where you are. That's over. That's done." Marcus looked up at him. "You can't promise." "I already promised," Bear said, and his voice had the specific weight of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean. When I put that vest on you in the street, that was the promise, public, in front of 4,000 witnesses. He held Marcus's gaze without blinking. I keep my word. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of a 12-year-old boy deciding whether to believe something good, deciding whether the architecture of protection being built around him was real or was the kind of thing that looked solid and then collapsed. Marcus picked up the coffee cup, drank, set it down. Okay, he said. Okay, Bear said. I believe you, Marcus said. I'm going to try to believe you. That's the best I can do right now. That's enough, Bear said immediately. That's plenty. You don't have to trust completely on day one. You've had good reasons not to trust. I'm not asking you to abandon your good reasons. I'm asking you to give us a chance to replace them. He sat back. Can you do that? Yeah, Marcus said. I can do that. Bear nodded. He picked up his phone, made a call, 2 sentences, then he put it away. Tom and Elaine are driving over, he said. They'll be here in about 30 minutes. You don't have to decide anything today. This is just meeting, just people. Okay. Okay, Marcus said. And then Raven appeared at the table with a second breakfast sandwich because she had apparently decided unilaterally that one was not enough. And she sat down and the three of them occupied a corner table in a diner in Iron Ridge and talked not about the morning, not about what came next, just talked the way people talk when they've been through something together and discovered that they like each other. And Marcus ate the second sandwich at whatever speed he wanted with nobody watching. 31 minutes later, Tom and Elaine Garrett walked through the door. Marcus saw them before Bear pointed them out. They weren't hard to identify, not because they looked like anything in particular, but because of the way they moved into the diner. Elaine went first head up, scanning, and when her eyes found the back table and found Marcus, she stopped. Just for a second. Long enough for Marcus to see what happened in her face, which was something entirely unguarded and immediate that she didn't try to control or soften. Her expression said, there he is. Just that. There he is. Tom was half a step behind her. He was a large man gone somewhat soft in the shoulders, the kind of large that had once been physical and was now just presence. He looked at his wife, looked at Marcus, and then he looked at Marcus himself, and his jaw moved slightly the way a jaw moves when you are being careful about what comes out of your mouth. They came to the table. Elaine sat down across from Marcus without being invited because the invitation was already obvious and she was not a woman who needed it spelled out. Tom sat beside her. Marcus, Elaine said, just his name. Not a question, not a preamble, just the name, the way you say the name of someone you've been worried about and are now relieved to see in one piece. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. I'm Elaine, this is Tom. She looked at him steadily, honest eyes the color of faded denim. I'm not going to pretend we don't know what we're here for. That would waste your time, and I don't think you have much patience for time wasting. Despite everything, the corner of Marcus's mouth moved. No, ma'am, he said, not a lot. Good, she said. Neither do I. She folded her hands on the table. Here's what I want to say, and then I'll answer any questions you have. Tom and I have space. We have a room, a real one, your own room door that locks from the inside, so you're always in control of it. We have food. We have a school district that I happen to know pretty well because I taught in it for 22 years, and we have enough distance from intrusive to give you room to figure out who you are without us hovering over every breath you take. She paused. What we don't have is any illusion that this is simple. You've been through something hard. You carry that. We know you carry that. We're not asking you to put it down. We're asking to be somewhere near you while you figure out what to do with it. Marcus looked at her. Wyatt, he asked, the same question he'd been asking all morning, the question underneath all of this, the one he couldn't stop returning to because the answer mattered more than anything else. Elaine didn't blink. Because I taught 4th grade for 22 years, she said. And in 22 years, I had a few kids like you. Bright, careful, always watching, carrying things no kid that age should carry. And most of them had someone. Most of them had a person who was paying attention. But some of them, she stopped, breathed. Some of them went home to nothing, and I thought about them. I still think about them. And when I heard about you this morning, I thought, here's one I can do something about. She looked at him directly. That's the whole answer. No charity in it. Just here's something I can do, so I'm going to do it. Tom had been quiet through all of this, which Marcus was starting to understand was his natural mode. He wasn't absent. His eyes were tracking everything, taking everything in with the attentive stillness of someone who was genuinely present. But he seemed to understand that this conversation belonged to Elaine and Marcus, and he was making space for it. Now he spoke. His voice was lower than Bear's, less commanding, but it had a quality that Marcus recognized, the particular timbre of someone who doesn't talk much, but means what they say completely. "I want to add one thing," Tom said. "You don't have to perform anything for us. You don't have to be grateful or cheerful or easygoing. You're allowed to be complicated. You're allowed to be angry about what happened to you. We're not looking for easy." He paused. "We're looking for real. Can you do real?" Marcus looked at this man, this stranger who had driven 30 minutes on a frozen road to sit across from a 12-year-old boy he'd never met, and asked him if he could do real. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Real's pretty much all I've got." Tom nodded. "Once. That was enough." Bear, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the conversation, now spoke. "There's something else," he said. "Something that came up this morning that affects you, Marcus, and you need to hear it directly from me." Marcus looked at him. The shift in Bear's tone was subtle but real. The particular gravity that meant incoming information was significant. "The interview is going to air tonight," Bear said, "but it's already moving. Dana's station posted a clip online an hour ago, just the last part, what you said about the other kids. It's already been shared 40,000 times. Marcus stared at him. 40,000. "As of 20 minutes ago," Bear said. "It's moving fast. By tonight." He paused. "I don't know what tonight looks like, Marcus. I won't pretend I do. But I need you to be prepared for the possibility that your story doesn't stay local." Elaine's hand moved across the table and covered Marcus's. Not squeezing, not gripping. Just there. He looked at it. He didn't pull away. "Whatever happens publicly," Elaine said, "your life privately is yours. The room with the lock. The breakfast that's just breakfast, not a photo opportunity. The school that's just school, that doesn't change regardless of what the internet does." She looked at him firmly. "You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. Did you?" Bear's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His expression shifted just slightly, just enough. He stood up from the table. "I need to step outside for a minute," he said, and his voice had the controlled evenness of someone managing news they haven't processed yet. "I'll be right back." He was gone for 7 minutes. Marcus talked to Tom and Elaine in his absence. Real talk, practical talk, the kind where you ask what the bus routes are like and whether there's a library nearby and what the food situation is on a typical Tuesday, which is the kind of information that actually tells you what a life will feel like. Tom knew every bus route. Elaine knew the library hours by heart. The food situation on a typical Tuesday, she said, usually involved something from the slow cooker that started smelling good around 4 p.m. and was ready by 6. "What kind of things?" Marcus asked. "Chili," Elaine said. "Pot roast, chicken and dumplings." She watched him. "What did your dad cook?" The question landed softly. Not clumsily, like she'd considered it carefully before asking. "Scrambled eggs," Marcus said. "Best in the state." Tom smiled. It rearranged his whole face into something younger. "I make a pretty serious scrambled egg," he said. "Saturday mornings." "The secret is low heat," Marcus said before he could decide whether to say it. He always said people cook them too hot. "Low heat and patience," Tom said, nodding. "You're absolutely right." Something small and enormous happened. In that moment, a connection made over scrambled eggs between a 12-year-old boy and a retired ironworker, a connection so ordinary that it barely registered as significant, and yet it was the most significant thing that had happened all morning, because it was specific and personal and had nothing to do with motorcycles or cameras or vest ceremonies. It was just two people discovering they agreed about something that mattered to them both. Marcus noticed it. He filed it somewhere careful. Bear came back in. He sat down. He looked at Marcus with an expression that Marcus hadn't seen from him yet, something that was working to stay neutral and not quite succeeding. "Tell me," Marcus said. Bear put his phone face up on the table. On the screen was a number. Marcus looked at it again. The number didn't change, so he had to conclude it was real. "What is that?" Marcus asked. "That," Bear said, "is the amount of money that has been donated to a fund established in your name in the last 3 hours." Marcus looked at the number. He was good at math, had always been good at math. One of those kids for whom numbers click into place with a natural ease, and the number on Bear's screen was not a small one. It was not a modest one. It was the kind of number that belonged to a different world than the one where you found half a granola bar on a park bench and split it in two equal pieces. That's not, Marcus started, stopped. Real, Bear said. It's real. How? The clip moved faster than we thought, Bear said. Someone with a large following shared it, then someone else. The fund was set up by a member of ours who does nonprofit work. It's legitimate, it's registered, every cent is accounted for. And it's been growing every minute since the clip hit. He paused. Some of it is designated specifically for your direct support, housing, education, whatever you need. But the majority of it, he paused again. The majority of it came in with a note. What note? Marcus asked. Bear turned the phone over to show him the message that had been pinned to the fund page by the person who'd set it up, citing what Marcus had said in the interview. Bear had screenshotted it. He handed the phone to Marcus. Marcus read it again. The note said, in honor of Marcus Webb, who reminded us that there are other kids out there. Half of everything donated goes directly to Marcus. The other half goes to finding the one still in the dark. He set the phone down on the table. He stared at it. Beside him, Raven, who had slipped back into the diner at some point and was sitting at the next table close enough to hear everything, said nothing at all. She just watched him. It's enough to fund a real foundation, Bear said quietly. A permanent one for homeless youth in Wisconsin. Outreach Shelter Support Placement Assistance. He looked at Marcus. In your name, if you'll allow it. Marcus looked up. The James Webb Foundation, he said. Bear blinked. He hadn't expected that. None of them had. After your father, Elaine said softly. He's the reason any of this happened, Marcus said. He's the one who taught me to stop. The foundation should carry his name, not mine. He paused. He looked for the word. I'm just the person who remembered what he taught me. The table was quiet. Outside, the sound of engines was a constant low presence, the gathered community of 4,000 people going about the business of an extraordinary day. Inside the diner in a corner booth, a 12-year-old boy had just named a foundation after his dead father, and the four adults sitting around him were all doing various versions of the same thing, which was trying to hold themselves together with dignity. Tom Garrett was the first to speak. His voice was rougher than usual. James Webb Foundation, he said. That's a good name? It's a strong name, Elaine agreed. She had both of Marcus's hands now. He had let her take them. He'd be proud, Marcus. I know, Marcus said simply. Not performance, not hope, certainty. He knew his father. He knew what James Webb would have felt standing on Kessler Street this morning, watching 4,000 people show up for his son. He would have laughed too loud. He would have shaken every single hand. He would have found Raven and said, he gets it from me, you know. And she would have rolled her eyes and liked him immediately. He knew. Bear stood up again. He had more phone calls to make, more logistics, to manage the operational reality of 4,000 people needing to be thanked and fed and eventually directed back to the roads they'd come from. But before he left the table, he paused and he looked at Marcus one more time. I need to ask you something, Bear said. And you tell me the honest answer, not the tough answer. Marcus looked up. Okay. How are you doing right now underneath all of this? How are you actually doing? The question was so direct and so specific, so carefully aimed at the interior rather than the exterior, that Marcus felt it land in a place that the ceremony and the cameras and the logistics hadn't touched. The actual place. The 12-year-old place that was exhausted and overwhelmed and grateful and terrified and missing his father with a sharpness that this morning had made acute. Because everywhere he turned, he saw the proof of what his father had built in him, and his father wasn't there to see it. I'm tired, Marcus said. Honest. I'm really tired, and He stopped, started again. I'm really glad she's alive, Raven. I'm really genuinely glad she's alive. But I'm also just... He exhaled. I'm just a kid, and today is a lot. Bear looked at him. Something in his face was open in a way that Marcus suspected it wasn't open very often in very many places. Yeah, Bear said, it is, you're doing it anyway. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder briefly. James Webb would be proud, he said, which was exactly what Elaine had said, but from Bear, it landed with a different weight, the weight of one man acknowledging another. Then he was gone, and Marcus sat with Tom and Elaine and Raven, and outside the engines rumbled steadily, and the clip kept spreading, And somewhere in the county welfare system, a file was being updated to reflect a new placement, and somewhere a foundation was being named, and somewhere 4,000 people were finishing their coffee and preparing to carry the story of Iron Ridge back to every corner of the country they'd come from. Marcus picked up the coffee cup. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Elaine noticed. She stood up, went to the counter, came back with a fresh one. She set it in front of him without comment. He looked at it, looked at her. She had already sat back down and was talking to Tom about something logistical, not making a production of the gesture, not waiting for acknowledgement. He picked up the fresh cup. The heat of it came through his palms. Real heat, deliberate, and present the specific warmth of something someone had just done for him on purpose. He held it with both hands and felt it, and did not take it for granted. He was getting better at that, at receiving things, at letting them land without deflecting. His father had given him so much courage, instinct, the particular moral clarity that had kept him in that alley through a 15 below night. But he'd had to find this part on his own, the willingness to accept that the world could also be generous. That generosity was something you were allowed to receive without guilt and without suspicion and without the constant bracing for its withdrawal. He was 12 years old, and he was learning that in real time in a diner on Commerce Street with a woman who'd just gotten him a fresh cup of coffee and a retired iron worker who agreed about scrambled eggs. It was in its way as significant as anything that had happened that morning on Kessler Street, maybe more. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the clip had been shared 1.2 million times. Bear told Marcus the number without preamble, the way he delivered all significant information straight across, no cushioning, trusting the recipient to handle what was real. Marcus heard it and set down the glass of water he was holding and stared at the table for a long moment. 1.2 million, a number so abstract, it had no natural home in the mind of a 12-year-old boy from Iron Ridge, Wisconsin. He turned it over, tried to find a way to make it mean something concrete. That's 1.2 million people, he finally said, who know that other kids are out there. Raven, sitting across from him in the motel room that had become the unofficial headquarters of the day, looked at him with an expression that was by now familiar. That combination of pride and something that ran deeper than pride, something closer to recognition. Like watching a mirror that reflected a version of yourself you'd always hoped existed. That's exactly the right way to think about it, she said. Is there a wrong way, Marcus asked. Most people would lead with the fame part, she said. The attention, the numbers for their own sake. The numbers don't mean anything by themselves, Marcus said. He said it without performance, just as a fact he'd already worked out. It's what they do. It's whether someone sees that clip and then goes looking for a kid in their city who needs help. That's the number that matters. Bear, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching this exchange, said nothing. He'd been saying nothing for the last few minutes in the specific way of a man who is witnessing something and does not want to interrupt it. Tom Garrett had stepped outside to make a call about the placement paperwork, and Elaine was at the small table by the window, going through a list on her phone school enrollment forms, welfare office contacts, a pediatrician in Dalton who could see Marcus that week. The quiet machinery of actually building a life running in parallel to everything else. Marcus kept glancing at her. The organized, purposeful movement of a woman who had already decided what was going to happen next and was making it happen, not waiting for someone to tell her she could. He thought, this is what it looks like when people mean it. Not the announcement, the follow-through, the list on the phone, the pediatrician's name written down. His phone buzzed. He looked down at it, a prepaid that Bear had produced from somewhere in the mid-afternoon, already loaded with minutes, already with Bear's number and Raven's and Sable's and Tom's and Elaine's programmed in. It was the first phone that had people in it that were specifically his since his father died. The notification was from the fund page, another donation, then another. The counter was moving in real time now, each refresh bringing a higher number, and Marcus watched it for 30 seconds and then turned the screen face down on the table because the number was getting to be too large to look at directly. I need to ask something, he said. Bear looked at him. Go ahead. The foundation, Marcus said. The James Webb Foundation. I want to have actual input in how it runs, not symbolic input, real input. He looked at Bear steadily. I know I'm 12. I know I can't run a nonprofit. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if it carries my father's name, it needs to be built the way my father would have built it. And the only person who knows how that is me. The room was quiet. Bear looked at Raven. Raven looked back at Bear with an expression that said, "You see what I mean? That's not just fair." Bear said, "That's correct. You have my word. Every structural decision goes past you. We don't finalize anything without your input. And when you're old enough," he paused, "if you want to run it yourself, that option is on the table." Marcus nodded. He'd needed to hear that said out loud, had needed to locate in the framework of this new life some thread of agency, some place where he was not simply receiving, but also directing. It mattered. It was the difference between being cared for and being managed, and he was old enough and sharp enough to know the difference. Tom came back in. He closed the door, looked at Elaine, gave her a small nod that Marcus understood meant paperwork is moving. Elaine's shoulders dropped half an inch, just half an inch, the specific physical exhale of someone who's been holding tension and has just gotten permission to release a portion of it. "There's one more thing," Tom said. He looked at Marcus. "The school situation, Elaine made a call this afternoon. The principal at Dalton Middle School is a former student of hers. He's holding a spot. You can start Monday if you want, or you can take more time. No pressure either direction." Marcus thought about school, about what it had been before the foster placement fell apart, before the group home, before Kessler Street and park benches and half granola bars. He'd been good at school, had genuinely liked it, which he'd always kept slightly private because liking school was not the kind of thing you advertised loudly at 11 years old. He'd liked the structure of it, the way problems had answers you could work toward and verify. He'd liked English class because stories felt like the most efficient way to understand other people without having to explain yourself first. He'd liked math for reasons he'd never quite articulated, something about the reliability of it, the way numbers behaved consistently, regardless of what was happening in the world around them. "Monday," Marcus said. Elaine looked up from her list. "Monday." "I want to start Monday," he said. "I've missed enough." She looked at him with those honest, faded denim eyes, and for a moment she didn't say anything at all, and then she said simply, "Okay, Monday it is." Tom put his hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder as he passed the same kind of contact Bear used, brief and firm, the language of men who are not demonstrative but want to be understood. Marcus received it the way he was getting better at receiving things, without deflecting. At 5:30, Bear called a final gathering. Not the full formation. Most of the riders had begun dispersing through the afternoon, heading back to their chapters, their cities, their ordinary lives that had been set aside for a single extraordinary day. But a core group remained, maybe 50 people, the ones closest to Raven, and the ones who'd been part of organizing the morning, and they gathered outside the motel in the early dark of a Wisconsin January evening. Marcus came out wearing the vest over his coat. It had dried and settled throughout the day, the leather conforming slightly to the shape of him, the 4,000 signatures making the surface stiff and permanent. He stood in the cold and looked at the faces of the people who'd come. Bear spoke briefly. No ceremony this time, just the real language of people who are closing something important and want to close it right. He thanked the riders. He told them what had been set in motion, the foundation, the placement, the school, the fun. He told them that Marcus Webb was not going to disappear back into the system. He made that a public witness statement, and the people around him received it with the silent gravity of people who intended to hold him to it. Then he turned to Marcus. "You want to say anything?" he asked. Marcus looked at the assembled faces. He thought about what to say. He thought about his father, who'd always said that the best speech was the honest one, not the eloquent one, not the moving one, just the one that said the truest thing as plainly as possible. "I want to say thank you," Marcus said. "Not for what you gave me, though I'm grateful for that more than I know how to say. But for coming at all, for getting with the call and getting on your bikes in the dark and driving to a town you'd never heard of." He paused. "I've been invisible for 8 months. And today I wasn't invisible. And that's," his voice held. He made it hold. "That's going to matter to me for the rest of my life." He stopped. That was the truest thing. He let it be enough. The group was quiet for a moment. Then Sable, who was standing at the left edge of the gathering, said in a voice that carried without effort, "Guardian angel." She put her fist over her heart. The group echoed it, Not in unison, not choreographed, not performed, just person by person, the same words, the same gesture traveling through the assembly at the pace of genuine feeling. Guardian angel, fist to heart, guardian angel, fist to heart. Marcus stood in the cold and let it land. He did not look away. He did not deflect. He stood there at 12 years old and received what was being given to him with his eyes open and his spine straight, and his father's initial pressed against the center of his back in black ink. When it was done, Raven came to him. She had her keys in her hand. She wasn't staying tonight. She was riding back to the chapter house, would be seen by the doctor. There would sleep in her own space and begin the work of her own recovery. But she'd wanted to see this through to the end, and she had, and now she stood in front of him and looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to call you," she said, "every week, not to check on you, to talk to you. There's a difference." "I know there's a difference," Marcus said. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway." She tilted her head slightly. "You good?" "Yeah," he said. "I think I'm actually good." She looked at him, read him the way she'd been reading people for decades. "You're allowed to be good," she said. "You've earned it 100 times over." "My dad earned it," Marcus said. "I just did what he taught me." Raven shook her head, gently but firmly. "No," she said, "that's not how it works. He taught you, yeah, but teaching and doing are not the same thing. Plenty of people get taught the right things and choose differently when it's cold and dark and nobody's watching." She held his gaze. "You chose, that was you. Own it." He breathed. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." She put her arms around him. Not the brief sidelong contact of someone being careful, a real embrace, full and present and firm. He stood inside it and felt for the second time that day, in a distinct and irreducible way, the sensation of being held by something that intended to hold him. He put his arms around her too. They stayed like that for a moment. Just a moment. Then she let go, stepped back, and there was nothing in her face she was trying to hide. "James Webb," she said quietly, "did something right." She turned and walked to her bike, and the engine caught, and she pulled out of the lot and onto the street, and Marcus watched her tail light until it was gone. Tom appeared at his shoulder. "Ready," "I shook her hair, bro," he said. Marcus turned. Tom's truck was parked at the edge of the lot. Elaine already inside the engine, running a rectangle of warm light visible through the windshield. "Ready?" Was he ready? He looked at the truck, looked at the motel, looked back up the street in the direction Raven had gone. He thought about the alley on Kessler, the cold ground, the woman who wasn't breathing right, the decision that hadn't felt like a decision at the time, just the only thing a person with his father's voice in his head could have possibly done. He thought about how different his life looked at 5:45 p.m. on the same day that it had looked at midnight, not because anything fundamental about him had changed, but because the world had finally turned to face him, finally acknowledged that he was there, finally sent the word out. He thought about all the kids it hadn't turned to face yet, all the ones still in alleys, still on benches, still doing math about what they could survive. He thought about them the way he'd been thinking about them all day, not as an abstraction, not as a cause, but as specific people with specific weights in their pockets, in specific voices in their heads that they were trying to keep alive through the cold. The James Webb Foundation was going to go looking for them. He was going to make sure of it. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I'm ready." He walked to the truck. Tom opened the back door, not because Marcus couldn't open it himself, just as the natural gesture of a man who opened doors for people he cared about, which was apparently now a category that included Marcus, and had apparently included Marcus since approximately 6:45 that morning, when Elaine made the phone call, which meant Marcus had been in this category for the entire day without knowing it. He got in. The heat was already running the specific dry warmth of a vehicle that had been warming up for a while intentionally in advance of him getting into it. Elaine turned around from the front seat and handed him something, a blanket folded, the kind you keep in a truck for emergencies. "It's a long drive," she said. "You can sleep if you want." "I'm not tired," Marcus said, which was completely untrue. "Okay," she said in the tone of someone who knows it's untrue and is going to let you have it anyway. Tom pulled out of the lot. The streets of Iron Ridge moved past the windows. Kessler Street, the hardware store, the alley that Marcus did not let himself look at directly, Commerce Street with the diner where Dolores was probably still brewing coffee and would be doing so until closing. The town that had ignored him for 8 months and then on the coldest night of the year given him back to the world. He didn't hold it against it. Iron Ridge hadn't known. That was the thing about invisible kids by definition. No one knew they were there. That was exactly the problem. That was exactly what the Foundation was going to try to fix. When the not knowing, which was human and understandable, the not looking, there was a difference, and it was the only difference that mattered, and it was fixable if people decided to fix it. He held the blanket in his lap. He looked out at the dark highway as Tom navigated toward Dalton. The road was clear. The county had salted it in the afternoon, and the surface was dry and plain and practical. Good road, easy road. The kind of road you could make time on if you knew where you were going. He thought about Monday, about walking into Dalton Middle School for the first time and finding a desk and sitting in it and being a student again. Not a former student, not a kid who used to go to school, but a present tense student who had somewhere to be and a reason to be there. He thought about what class he'd want first. Math, probably. Start with something reliable. He thought about Saturday mornings and scrambled eggs cooked on low heat. He thought about the room with a door that locked from the inside. He thought about a vest covered in 4,000 names that was going to hang on a hook in that room, visible from the bed, present and permanent and real. He thought about his father standing on the shoulder of Highway 14, in the rain stepping out of the car, walking toward a stranger in trouble, not knowing what was coming around the curve, but stopping anyway, because that was what you did. That was who James Webb was. That was the bone-deep, unshakable, costly and luminous truth of the man. The curve had come, the truck had come, and James Webb had not been able to step back in time. But the lesson had survived. It had traveled forward in the only way lessons can travel through a person, through a choice, through a cold night in an alley, when a 12-year-old boy had knelt down in the snow and put his fingers against a stranger's neck and felt a pulse and decided that pulse was worth everything he had left. And what had come from that decision? What had assembled on Kessler Street? What was moving in bank accounts and on news screens and in the hearts of 1.2 million people who had watched a clip and felt something shift? All of it traced back to one man's way of moving through the world, to the scrambled eggs cooked on low heat and the lessons delivered on quiet Saturday afternoons and the voice that had stayed in his son's ear through the coldest night of the year. James Webb had raised a boy who stopped for people in trouble. That boy had stopped. And the world had answered. Elaine's voice came softly from the front seat. Marcus, you can sleep, honey. We've got you. He looked at the blanket in his lap, unfolded it, pulled it around his shoulders. The warmth came up immediately, dense and real, and he let himself feel it without bracing against it, without calculating when it would end. Outside, the highway ran straight and dark toward Dalton. The stars were out, the specific, extravagant clarity of a winter sky in Wisconsin. More stars than city people ever saw, the whole cold sky full of light that had been traveling a long time to get here. He looked at it through the window for a while and felt in his chest the particular stillness of someone who has come through something enormous and arrived somewhere the other side. Not fixed, not finished, not without the weight of what he'd carried and what he'd lost, but arrived, present, real, known. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 8 months, Marcus Webb fell asleep somewhere warm, headed somewhere safe, held by the weight of 4,000 names on his back and his father's initial written in his own hand at the center. He did not dream of cold. He did not dream of alleys. He dreamed of engines, the deep, full, certain sound of 4,000 motorcycles moving together through the dark. And in the dream, the sound was not frightening but warm. Not a warning, but a promise, the sound of a world that had finally turned around and learned from one boy's courage on the coldest night of the year that no one was supposed to be left behind. James Webb had taught him that. Marcus Webb had proved it. And now the world knew.